Good afternoon, or good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're watching in the world. My name is Helen Pengelly, and I'm a spiritual coach and mentor and founder of Heal with Helen. And today I'm going to be talking about my most favourite subject that I'm passionate about, meditation, because I believe everybody should learn to meditate. And I'm going to share a bit about my experience and addressing some misconceptions. And I've called this talk Taming the Monkey Mind, because one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about meditation is that you have to stop thinking. Well, I've sort of recently realized I have ADHD. So if I can meditate with a sort of very busy, active mind that's going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, coming up with new ideas all the time, if I can do it, anyone can. And I'm really fortunate. Well, I say fortunate. I've created the conditions in my life so I can go to a retreat centre. Well, obviously pre-pandemic, and I've started going again now. And I go spend about a month there every year because I go and volunteer, which means that I get to sort of hang out in that space where there's no distractions of phones, internet, emails, anything else. And I can just focus on growing my practice, and I get to hang out with some really great teachers. And I started meditating about 15 years ago now. And yeah, and the way I got into it was I went along to a networking, it was a business networking event. I had a completely different business before, selling gluten-free food, so very different to what I do now. And on that, in that networking group, I met a couple who ran spiritual tours, and they went to places like the pyramids, Glastonbury, Stonehenge, Mount Shasta, the great sort of spots in the world. But they had a difficult time explaining to people what they did. And bearing in mind, as I say, this was about, well, it's even more than 15 years ago, it's probably about 16 years ago now. It wasn't as mainstream. Meditation and spiritual stuff wasn't as mainstream as it is now. And they ran a taster evening to sort of give us a workshop with some of the things that they did. And we did some chanting, some movement. They taught us about muscle testing, and we did some meditation. And the next morning when I woke up, my mind was just so still and so calm. And I'd recently got divorced. I was a single mom with 3 young sons. So it was often mayhem in the morning, as you can imagine, with 3 boys running around shouting and fighting and trying to get them organised and ready for school and everything. And I just felt so calm. Despite all this going on around me, I just thought, oh, this is amazing. I need more of this. And that is also another thing that can trip people up, because when you start out, it can be like that. You can feel all blissed out, all calm. This is wonderful. But after a while, eventually, you're going to hit a wall. All your stuff is going to come up. You're going to be challenged. You're going to be confronted. And that is when, people can give up and think, oh, this is not for me. But I was on a retreat last month, and the guy leading the retreat said, that happened to him after a couple of years. And his teacher said to him, that's great, because it means you're doing it right. And it means that you're ready to face whatever needs to be faced, because the universe never gives us anything more than we can handle. Sometimes I want to scream at the universe. I say, why are you doing this to me? Why are you giving me all this stuff? But then I just have to remind myself, well, if it didn't think I could handle it, this wouldn't be coming up. And that's another thing as well, because as I've learned over the years, they talk about, you've probably heard this analogy before, it's like peeling off the layers of an onion. You reveal something, and you perhaps heal from that wound, or get insight around whatever it is you need to get insight, overcome a limiting belief or something. That layer comes off, and then there's always more underneath. And so and again, there's a good reason for that, because if it all came up at once, we would literally die. We wouldn't be able to handle all that stress. So and so getting back, to the topic of meditation, why does that help? Because that is where, when we're sitting on the cushion or the chair or wherever we meditate, that is when we're kind of practicing. It's called practice for a reason, because we're practicing for when we go out into the world. It's not like you sit down for 20 minutes a day, meditate. Say, for example, like with exercise, you go and exercise for half an hour, then you sit at a desk for the rest of the day. The meditation goes with you, and you carry that awareness. And that was the thing that I noticed, because when I first started, it was like, oh, well, I'm doing this, blah, blah, blah. And then after a few years, or maybe not even that long, I started to notice I was responding differently to situations to how I would have done in the past. And perhaps I would be calmer, less reactive. Things in the past that would have made me angry weren't bothering me. Or if I did feel angry, I would be able to sort of acknowledge those feelings, but then not react to them. I don't have, okay, I'm feeling this anger, but now I have a choice how I respond. Now, I learned to meditate from Buddhist teachers, because there were no apps or sort of online things back then. Because after I'd been to that workshop, and I thought, oh yeah, and I felt so calm, I think I need more of this. And of course, the universe handed it all my way. I was in a shop one day. There was a little leaflet by the till advertising a meditation class that was starting the following week, and it was on an evening when my boys were at Scouts, so I didn't need to get a babysitter, and it was just around the corner from their Scout hut as well. So it all fell into place, and so I was completely new to sort of spiritual work. Well, say completely new, I wasn't completely new, but this finally I'd found something that made sense. I mean, I'd been going to church for years. I used to sing in a church choir, but there was always something that I felt like there was something missing. And that is not to sort of I'm not against any religion, because it's a personal thing. It's what works for you. And that's a good thing about meditation. You don't need to follow any particular spiritual path or religion, and it fits in with anything. So although I learned from Buddhist teachers, they're universal truths. And when you look at other spiritual traditions and religions, you see, and that's when because I only really knew about Christianity because I'd gone to a Church of England school, and I didn't really know much about other faiths and other traditions. And over the years since then, I've started to learn more. And then you see the common threads that pass through them all, and that they're all saying the same thing, and that are probably adapted to the cultures where these traditions grew from. So that's another misconception. It's like you've got to be a Buddhist or a Taoist or follow, it's like an Eastern thing. Okay, maybe it's still fairly new to the West, and it's getting more sort of mainstream over here, but it's not, it fits in to any lifestyle. And so so I started going to this group, which was actually a Buddhist group. So I learned about Buddhism and all sorts of things. And that's when I started going on the retreats, because the people that were leading these classes then were running a retreat, and they invited us along. And then I loved it, and I just think I knew again I needed more of this. And I think everybody should go on retreat at least once a year. And because that's another misconception about retreats. Everyone's, oh, that's so lovely, and they can't, if you've never been on a retreat, you can think, oh, it's a bit like a spa. Hi, Sue, nice to see you. Or see you, well, you can see me, I can't see you, but nice that you're here. Yeah, and because again, like with the meditation, like I was saying before, that you can after you've been meditating for a while, it can all be lovely, and then suddenly stuff starts to come up. It's the same on a retreat, that you think, oh yeah, this is going to be lovely, it's going to be chilled. But of course, because you're not, you haven't got all your usual distractions around you like TV, internet, phones and things, it's like their space then to you can't avoid your feelings and your thoughts, you can't distract yourselves from them. So and again, that's why it's really important as well to have a good teacher who's been through this and dealt with their stuff, because like I said, you know, I was lucky. I think I was lucky that there weren't these apps and guided meditations online and things like that, because that's another thing. If you're, you know, there's nothing wrong with those things, don't get me wrong. I use Insight Timer meditation app because that supports my practice, but I wouldn't use it to learn meditation, if that makes sense. Because that's where, if you haven't got that support, then you're more likely to give up, because you haven't got anybody to ask questions, you know. Because when I went on when I first started going on retreats, they were just like weekend ones, because I couldn't, my kids were young and I couldn't leave them for longer. And then once they were old enough, then I could go on longer retreats. And when I went on my first retreat, which was a week long, that seemed like ages, but now a week just flies by. But I was having quite a difficult time. And the retreat was being led by a guy called Kamala Sheila, and he's written lots of books on meditation, and I'd read one of his books. He was, you know, really well known meditation teacher, so he was very experienced. He'd been teaching meditation for nearly 40 years or something, and we had night one-to-one interviews with him where we could ask him questions, talk about our practice, what was coming up, and that was really my breakthrough. Because when I said at the beginning, you know, about having a busy mind and things like that, and thinking I wasn't good enough, because I would sit in the shrine room at this retreat centre, and then I'd look around and see everybody sitting there looking all zen, and there's me who just wants to get up and run out, and feeling that I'm not good enough. And so I was telling him this, and he said to me, he said, "But Helen," he said, "you don't need to believe what your mind is telling you." And that, when I start, you know, when it seems to get a bit much and I'm overthinking things and feeling overwhelmed, I just remember what he said, because that has just really helped me. It's like, okay, you know, we can't stop the thoughts, because, okay, they might slow down, they might stop if you're lucky, but the chances are they're not going to. So now I just remember, well, you know, my mind's just going to carry on doing its thing, because that's what minds do. And one thing now that I find really helps me is that I imagine it's like when you're watching the news on TV, not that I watch the news, but you know what it's like. You've got the newscaster there at the bottom of the screen. You've got like I don't know what you call it, a thing scrolling across, sort of like a ticker tape with the breaking news and the headlines. And I imagine my thoughts are like that little thing across the bottom of the screen. Just my thoughts are just going across like that. Ooh, they're going through my awareness. Yeah, I can notice them, but then they're gone. You know, I don't have to get. They don't have to distract me from the main thing, whatever that is that I'm trying to focus on, or what I'm doing at the time. And of course, you can also start to notice what your thought patterns are, and that's really helpful as well. Because another benefit that meditation has had for me, I used to be a terrible worrier. I mean, I still worry at times, you know, that's human as well. But in the past, I used to think that was real, that my worrying was real, and it was a good thing to do, because I don't know why I thought it was a good thing to do, because it was just something that I did, so I didn't know any different. And then, of course, you realise, oh, well, worrying doesn't really help, because most of the things you worry about never happen anyway. So, and because the thing about meditation as well, it's about being in the present moment. So if I start worrying or getting anxious about something that might happen in the future, I come back to the present and say, well, in this moment now, everything is okay. I'm I'm warm, I'm secure, and I've got everything I need. So I don't need to get anxious about something that hasn't happened yet or may never will happen. So that we're very rarely living in the present. We're either in the past or the future, either worrying about what's going to happen, or making plans, or fantasizing, or we're going over stuff that's happened in the past, regretting stuff, I wish I'd done that differently, and going over things and analyzing what happened and things like that. And either way, that takes us away from the present. So meditation can also help you become aware of what your habitual patterns are. So are you mostly living in the past, or are you mostly living in the future? And I notice that I'm one of the people who are mostly living in the future, because I'm sort of either worrying or making plans, or imagining, fantasizing about what may happen. I mean, and that's different to visualizing when it's a conscious thing and you want to visualize something. But I'm not going to talk about that today. There's plenty of information about that out there. So I'm not saying that you don't do that, because that's a valid thing to do. But it's when it's kind of aimless and your mind's just wandering, and there's no sort of structure or anything to it. And then, what and another thing people say when they meditate, oh well, when I meditate, my mind keeps wandering off, and this kind of thing. And I say, well, always happens, unless you're, I don't know, unless you're enlightened, unless you're a Buddha, that will happen. And that's another thing that I learned, that the point of meditation is to notice when that happens. So whatever the focus of the meditation is, whether it's whether you're focusing on the breath, whether it's metta, which is cultivating loving kindness, or it might be a body meditation, or whatever the focus is. The point when you're doing it right is when you notice that your mind has wandered off, and you're not focusing. We'll use the breath as an example, and you're not focusing on the breath anymore. So then all you do in that moment is bring your attention back to the breath, and you can sort of mentally give yourself a pat on the back for noticing, because that is huge. Hi Anita, I'm in Bognor Regis, so I'm just down the road from you. So then that is like, yes, I can do this. I can notice when my mind is wandering off. And of course, the more that you do that, when you're not meditating, then you can become aware of when you're getting caught up in thoughts, and you're away from the present moment, and you're not dealing with the situation. And so for one example that I like to give is, I used to be a teacher, and I could just calm down the class by coming back to the present. Because if I was starting to have anxious thoughts like, oh God, these kids won't settle down, I can't control them, ooh, of course, then that's how they would be. But if I just took a breath, just breathe, come back into the present, and just sort of calm my mind, just still my body, then they would all calm down too. So it doesn't just benefit you, it benefits people around you too. And you don't even need to, they didn't even need to know that I was doing it. I wouldn't need to tell them this, I would just do it, and they would calm down. And it was the same with my youngest son. He was he was 25 last week, so he's a young man now, but I've got 3 boys, he's the youngest, as I said, and he was the worst as a teenager. He was an absolute nightmare, angry young man. He was just like Kevin, the teenager. I mean, he had a lot to deal with, I'm not going to go into that now, but even so, it was really, he really used to push my buttons a lot, and I was worried about him. I thought, oh God, he's going to end up like his dad, is he, and being abusive and that kind of stuff. But now he's an amazing young man. He says, oh, when I get angry, he says, I calm down, I notice. He does yoga. He's just like, I would never have ever thought that he would end up like that 10 years ago when he was 15. So, but I sort of credit that, or partly, to my own practice, because I learned not to be reactive to the way he was acting, and to be calm and to breathe, and also not trying to change him, because you can't change anybody else, you can only change yourself. And that's really frustrating when you realize that, because you want everybody else to change. You say, really, I'm the one that's got to change. And yeah, but anyway, that's how it works, unfortunately. So it was just like, I just got to keep practicing. And also when I was teaching as well, that was when my practice was really like hardcore, really full on, because if I didn't do this, I know, well, how am I going to get through the day? And I remember working in one school which was quite challenging, and I used to get in early and meditate in my classroom every morning, even before I started, because I thought, well, even if by 10 o'clock the year 10s are making me cry, at least I've started the day out right. So so there are so many ways that it benefits your life. And oh, sorry, I just heard a noise, and what that was. And so I've kind of lost my thread of what I was saying now. Yeah, that it benefits others around you as well, because it helped me to sort of organize my thoughts. It is hard to change. It's very hard. And I think that's the thing that we have to acknowledge. But it gets to that point. There's a lovely quote, and one of my favorite meditation teachers, Paramananda, who's also written some books on meditation. He's visually impaired, and he's he's very nearsighted, so he hasn't got much vision. So everything, he's just amazing. He knows all these poems, and he just recites them all by heart. And he's just got such a way of that you go so deep with his meditations, and yet they're so deceptively simple. And it's just like, he says things like, when you go away from the tree, if all you remember is just to be connected to the earth, then that's a good thing. And I think that's another thing. It doesn't have to be complicated. We can keep it simple, because as human beings, we like to make everything complicated, don't we? It's just the way we are. When you look at the mess the world's in now, it's like, well, why can't we just go back to a simpler way of living and being? And I think we're going back towards that. And I think, what's happened over the last year and a half, if you look at the higher reason for that happening, I believe it's because the universe is saying, we've got to slow down. We can't keep living the way we did before. We can't keep destroying the planet for our own selfish needs and our motivations. We're here to look after it, to look after nature and the earth and animals and trees and everything, that we're here to take care of it. Because obviously, if we don't, we lose out too. So so when we come back to what I'm saying, about keeping it simple. So it can be just something simple as just sitting still with a cup of tea. You can just sit, and the whole point is, again, like I said, it's about being done in the moment. I know it doesn't have to be done seated. The Buddha talked about the 4 different postures. So that's another misconception, that you have to sit down in the lotus position for hours on end like they do on Vipassana retreats. But no, that doesn't really achieve anything, to be honest. You just get really uncomfortable, get frustrated, and it doesn't have to be tortuous. So you can do it. So the 4 postures are sitting, lying down, standing and walking. So you can meditate in any of those 4 positions. Not always good lying down, especially when you're starting out, because it's easy to fall asleep. It's easy to fall asleep when you're sitting up as well. And again, that's another thing not to beat yourself up about, because it might be that you're genuinely tired. Because the thing is, if we've been living life at 90 miles an hour, and now we're starting to sit down and slow down, it's like this sometimes happens when I go on a retreat. If you've been quite busy and lots going on, and perhaps not taking care of yourself as much as you should be, and not getting enough rest, suddenly the body goes, oh, finally I can relax. And I can have some sleep or whatever. So it may be that you actually need to sleep, or it might be resistance, because as Priscilla just put in the comments, it can be hard to change. So when you try anything new, especially something that's good for you, there again, it's likely that you're going to meet with some resistance. And as I said, maybe not at first, and it might be, oh, this is all wonderful, I'm all blissed out. And then things will come up like distracting thoughts. One thing that I've noticed that happens a lot when I'm meditating is that I start getting itches, and it's like, and then I realize, well, I don't normally itch, what's going on? And I realize, well, it's my mind trying to distract me from the meditation. It's like, oh, you've got to go and scratch that itch. And if I just let it go, it would disappear. So and that's something to be aware of before, because our ego mind doesn't want us to change. It doesn't want us to grow because it feels uncomfortable. And change and growth is always going to be uncomfortable. And again, meditation helps with that, because you know, when you're meditating, you're working through those uncomfortable thoughts, those uncomfortable feelings and emotions. So it's sort of building that muscle, really, that's making you stronger and more resilient and able to cope with change. Because that was one thing that I noticed last year at the start of the pandemic. It was like it was quite weird, wasn't it? Well, it was all quite surreal, wasn't it? But just watching people, how they were reacting to it, because they just weren't used to dealing with change, because we want everything to stay the same. But that's another thing that I work with a lot. And again, as the Buddha said, one of the major causes of suffering is impermanence, the fact that nothing is permanent, everything is changing all the time. And of course, what happened last year was that it was happening to everybody, because normally if something happens to you, like, you know, you get ill or there's a bereavement or something like that, it hasn't happened to the people around you, so you've probably got that support network. But this time it was happening to everybody. So and you could see most people didn't have the skills or the tools to be able to deal with what was happening. So that's why they were going out and buying toilet roll and things like that, and all the fear that was coming up. And it's like, I would say the fear is not about the virus, because I mean, it's not that, I mean, okay, it's not nice, COVID, I mean, I've had it, but it's just, you know, it's part of life. Sickness is part of life. Death is part of life. And that is, you can't sort of wait and think, oh, well, once all this is over, everything's going to be okay. That's not the point. The whole point is being happy now in the moment, and just accepting that everything is changing from moment to moment. And again, in your meditation practice, that's something else that you can use as a focus. Is in the body, it's a good one to do. It's like focus on a part of your body and where that you feel some kind of sensation, and then it's like, is that permanent? Is that staying the same? And the more you focus on it, however subtle it is, you notice that there are things changing. I mean, and our bodies change. I mean, we don't look like we did 20 years ago, do we? We're changing all the time. So and so the only thing that it is sort of permanent is change, really. That's the only thing that's true, that we know everything changes. And it's kind of, and then you kind of learn to make peace with that. It's like, okay, we might not like what's happening, we might not like the changes, and again, that's another cause of suffering, is when we want things to be different to how they are. And again, it's not a passive thing. It's not like, oh well, I just give up, I can't do anything about this. It's like, maybe you can do something about it. It's like the serenity prayer, isn't it, about accepting the things that you, what's it, accept the things I cannot change, and change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, or something like that. So that's it. I don't know. I can't remember it, but you get the point anyway. So and again, being making peace with that, and knowing that we're all going to die at some point as well. And that's not being morbid or anything like that, because it's a fact of life, isn't it? And it's like, we can't live our lives as if we're going to live forever, because we're not. And because that kind of set the Buddha off on his path. It was the four sights, because he'd grown up in a palace where he had everything, all his sort of physical needs met, plenty of money, food, that he didn't want for anything. And then he went out one day and he saw an old person, a sick person, and a dead body, because they, back in India, back in 2,500 years ago, they would carry them through the street. And then he saw a spiritual, what they call him, like spiritual beggar or whatever they call, somebody who was going round on his spiritual journey or whatever. And that was when he realized that what he'd been shown wasn't the full truth, and that we are all going to get sick at some point in our life. We're all, if we're lucky, we're going to get old, and we're all going to die. And so when we and that's when we become happy. I know it sounds a bit weird, but then when we can accept that is what happiness is. It's not about everything being perfect, because it's never going to be perfect. And of course, if you're constantly striving for things to be different to the way they are, then that will cause more suffering. And then, or the other one is wanting to fix things. It's like when we're doing something that we enjoy, or things are going well, then we want to sort of hold on to that, to grasp onto it, instead of just enjoying it for what it is in the moment. And there's another sort of, it was a joke, I think I heard somewhere, where somebody had started meditating, and he went to his meditation teacher, and he said, oh, I'm having a really hard time at the moment. He said, I'm really can't settle, my thoughts are all over the place, and I'm getting really distracted, and I'm just finding it really hard to sit down and meditate. I don't know what to do. And the meditation teacher said, don't worry. He said, that will pass. And so he said, just carry on doing what you're doing. So he did, and he went away and carried on practicing. And then after a while, things started to get good again. It was calm, blissful, relaxed. So he went back to his teacher. He said, fine now, it's wonderful, it's blissful, it's beautiful. And the teacher said, that will pass. So we can know that when things are going well, great, but they're probably going to change. But also when things aren't going so well, when things are tough, that will change too. And another thing that I've sort of learned, and from my sort of meditation experience, is about, when you're meditating, you're with the whole of your experience. It's like not trying to avoid any difficult thoughts and emotions or anything like that. And the more you can just be fully present with that, then you start to notice that it's not black and white. And the Buddha called this it's non-duality, because as humans, we like to separate everything into boxes, don't we? It's good or it's bad, it's old or it's new, and young, old. or whatever, you know, these opposites. And then you realize that actually that's not true. And when experience that really brought that home to me was I fell off, probably about 10 years ago now. I fell off my bike, and I fell, I think it was on my right side, and down that side I was all grazed and bruised, and it was really sore. And I was lying in bed one day trying to get sleep, oh, you know, aching and that, and then I suddenly realized, although it was painful and uncomfortable on that side of, on the right side of my body, the left side of my body was okay. So it's like, and we, because as humans, we're naturally wired to seek out the negative. It's just the way we are. It's like an evolutionary thing from when we were sort of cavemen. We're looking out for dangers, and of course a lot of those dangers don't exist, especially for those of us living in the Western world. They don't exist anymore. But of course, the primitive part of our brain is still looking for those dangers and doesn't know any different. So if we have a negative thought or something, our brain thinks that it's really bad, and it's true, and it's real, and it's a threat. So we can start to recognize those things as well. Again, like my teacher said, you don't have to believe what your mind is telling you, because especially if I'm sitting here in my living room and I'm meditating, unless there's an earthquake, which is very unlikely on the south coast of England, or there's going to be something catches fire or whatever, it's highly unlikely that there's going to be any threat to my life. But we kind of feel that in our bodies still. We feel like, oh my God, this is some kind of a threat. So we get used, so we can get used in our meditation practice, the kind of things that our mind is telling us that it's perceiving these threats, that it's worrying, and it's overthinking things about things that may never happen. Right. So I have got just over 10 minutes left. So what I think I've talked for long enough. I didn't know what I was going to say, or I sort of knew roughly, but I just saying what needs to be said, and have faith that the message that I need to get out is getting out. And that's the other thing people have asked, how do you lead meditations? I started leading meditations, perhaps, oh, you're very welcome, I'd probably been meditating for about 10 years when I started to lead meditations. And that's another thing about finding a meditation teacher. It's like, it's a bit of a nightmare now, because there's all these sort of courses where you can become an accredited teacher, go and do a 6-week course. But I'm very skeptical of some of those, because all it means is that they paid, like the ICF or somebody like that, they paid money to get an accreditation. What really matters is what that person's been through in their life. You know, because a friend of mine said to the other day, are you a qualified meditation teacher? Well, what qualifies somebody? A bit of paper or their experience? So I won't say any more about that now. I think that we should do a practice, and so you can experience something for yourself, and just come back into the present moment. Oh, and I was just saying about leading meditations. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there. Because when in my meditation group, my Buddhist group, and it was going to be my first evening of leading a meditation, and some new people came along who hadn't meditated before. And one of the order members, an ordained Buddhist who was leading the group, he said, oh, do you want me to take over? Do you want me to do it? And for a second, you know, there was my not good enough thinking, you know, I've got to step up here. You know, this is an opportunity for me to step up, and also to have faith in something higher. And then that was sort of like, and my meditation practice went to another level when I started leading meditations, because when you're leading them, you have to be fully present. You know, if I'm sitting in a meditation room and somebody else is leading it, or I'm just meditating on my own, yeah, I can get a bit lazy and my mind can wander off and yeah, I'm doing that. But when I'm leading it, boom, I've got to be fully present. And the way I lead meditations is just what's going on for me. I'm just channeling it. It's real, it's in the moment, it's not pre-planned, it's not scripted. So I don't even know what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes. So as Priscilla said, change can be scary, but it can also be something we can get curious about. Oh, what's going to happen next? So I invite you in this practice to get curious. Just get curious about your minds, because our minds are really interesting. They're fascinating what they do. You think, where did that come from? Yeah, it's amazing. So somebody asked about, do we have to do it seated? No, you don't. So you can get into comfortable posture, whatever's comfortable for you. So but if you're seated, we'll assume that you are, because that's how most people do it. If you're sitting on a chair, it's important that your legs are uncrossed and your feet, because then you can sort of feel really grounded on the connected to the earth, and that your spine is straight but not too stiff. So I sort of tend to sort of push my backside into the bottom of the chair like that, and then I can sit up straight, and then just rest your hands on your lap. And sometimes you might like to put a cushion under your feet, because it's nice if your thighs are parallel to the ground as well. So I have a little singing bowl here, which I will ding in a minute, and you can close your eyes. Again, you don't have to close your eyes when you meditate. It's not a good idea when you're walking to do that. So but it can, especially when you're starting out, it can minimize distractions as well. So if you want to, you can close your eyes. And just come into the present moment. And just notice what's current, what's real for you right now. Just acknowledge any thoughts, any feelings, any emotions. Not try to suppress them. Just let them be there. And if anything comes up that feels a bit painful, then you can always just focus on the breath. And just have a sense of your whole body and the space that it takes up in the room. And notice if there are any areas of tension. Most common areas where we hold on to tension in the forehead, the jaw, the shoulders, and the hands. If you notice any tension in those areas or any other areas, just breathe into those areas now and just relax them. Anytime your mind wanders off, And don't beat yourself up about it. Just notice, congratulate yourself for noticing. And just keep coming back to the breath. And now start to become aware of the space around you, your environment that you're in. Notice any sounds. Just let them come and go without chasing after them. Notice any sensory experiences, the sensation of your clothes, the air against your body, the temperature of the air, the weight of your body going down through the sitting bones, through your feet, feeling connected to the earth and the ground. That's really important to do, because when we're meditating, we can get caught up in our heads by just bringing that awareness down to the ground and to your feet. It's just really great for grounding yourself. Being aware of the senses and any smells, anything you can taste, see. Even if you've got your eyes closed, you might be just aware of the light. And again, as you notice these things, also be aware of any judgments that you're making about them being good or bad, or anything else. Are you able to let that go and just let things be the way they are? And are you able to accept yourself just the way you are? And now just expanding your awareness out, just being aware of the room that you're in and the space that that room takes up. And then expanding your awareness to the rest of the building. Space outside the building. Any people that might be there. Or any other living beings. And just keep expanding that awareness to include the town or the village or the city where you live. Just expand that awareness out as much feels comfortable to you. The rest of the county, the country, continent. And also, as we expand our awareness to become aware of more of the world, being aware of the other people who are sitting here meditating with us today. I know we have people in the UK, South Africa, Australia, possibly other places as well. Just feeling that connection, knowing that we're all one. And then as you go throughout the rest of your day, just carrying that awareness throughout your day, whatever you're doing, wherever you're going. Oh, I just feel like after doing that, I mean, what was that? It wasn't even 10 minutes. So that's another thing. You don't have to meditate for hours on end, just in a few minutes, you can come back to center, bring yourself back into the present moment and just then carry on going throughout your day. Can you imagine what the world would be like if politicians did that? How things would change. Well, I think we are going to come to an end of this talk now. We're going to wrap it up. And it's thank you for all the interactions and the comments and the questions. If you want to know more about what I do, I have a YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com and then just /heal with Helen. And my website is healwithhelen.com, and you can sign up for my emails, and I do things on the full moon and new moon as well, and I'm a coach and do all sorts of things. So it's been lovely to talk to you today, and so wonderful to have people all over the world. I always just like, oh God, my heart now is like, it just feels full, because I just think it's so amazing that we have this technology now. And I'd also like to thank Priscilla and Stefan for inviting me to talk today, and just acknowledge them for everything that they do. And I guess if you're here, you went to the Wellness Lifestyle Conference website. We do regular talks on their YouTube channel, and also oh, you're very welcome, Linda. I hope I said that correctly. And yeah, so their YouTube channel as well. I do talks on there, and lots of other amazing speakers. And I just want to just acknowledge them for all the wonderful work that they're doing, just bringing this wonderful community, like-minded people from all over the world. So I'm just sending you all lots of love through the internet waves, whatever it is, and around the world. So take care, go well. I'll see you very soon. I'm not sure how you stop.